All right, good evening. Oh my goodness, it is Wednesday night. It is 9 p.m. I am live online all by myself, waiting for my friends. Hi, Nina. How are you? Thank you for joining me. And Pinar, hi. Okay, we're getting some friends here with us. Good deal. Hi, y'all. It's Wednesday night. Oh, I do love Wednesday night for a couple of reasons. One is that we do food addiction, fair and firm. And another is that I am back in Atlanta with my kids, my grandkids, and I love being here with all of them. So, all right, welcome. It is the end of August, which I can hardly believe. Golly, September, right around the corner. Gosh, okay. Well, welcome to Food Addiction, Fair and Firm. Food addiction, being fair, stands for food addiction is real. You know that food addiction is real. We've talked about the awful realities of food addiction. But remember that if you're an addict, it can also lead you to a place that very few people actually get to examine and explore in life or experience, which is more of an examined life. And people who really examine their lives a little bit, I believe, live more fully. So if you're a food addict, join us as we examine addiction and how it affects your life, how it affects the lives of others, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And food addiction, firm. Freedom is recovering mindfully. Mindfully meaning living in the moment, doing the next wise thing, slowing down so you can make some healthy decisions. And as you know, unless it's your first time here, I am Dr. Connie Stapleton. I have worked professionally in the world of bariatrics for about going on 15 years and the world of addiction and recovery for at least 25 years. I'm also a recovering addict, so I know the struggles. I know that addiction is very real. This program is about food addiction. However, the information here applies to any addiction and the recovery from any addiction. So, whether or not your addiction is food, or if you have an addiction to food and you struggle with other addictions as well, I promise you're not alone. All right, most people who have addictions don't just suffer with one, they suffer with many or several, or sometimes they bounce from one to another. But sometimes the addictions are concurrent. So anyway, regardless of what your addiction is, there is help, there is hope, there is recovery, and there is healing. And that's what we are here to discuss. So last week we talked about, are you able to, can you, are you willing to participate in what is necessary for you to find healing in addiction. Tonight we're going to talk about how our addictions affect other people. We're going to talk about how our addictions affect the people closest to us and also sometimes even strangers. So first of all, I want to talk about how we've said before that addiction is like having a hijacked brain. If you're active in addiction, meaning if you're using substances or engaging in behaviors that lead you to do things that go against your own personal values, for example, or that don't make sense to you, or that you do in spite of saying, that's not who I am. That's not something I would normally do. If your behavior doesn't make sense to you, you want to quit, but you can't seem to be able to, you're probably in active addiction. So when we're in active addiction, it's like our brains are taken hijacked. They're being hijacked by a disease. The disease is addiction. Most of you, if you're joining in on this program, also have the disease of obesity. And what I want you to remember is that these are two very distinct and separate diseases. And when you go on a weight loss journey, whether that's through bariatric surgery or a national program or a diet you've made up, the weight loss, the surgery especially, focuses on the obesity. Your diet focuses on your disease of obesity. If you have an addiction, it's a completely separate disease. And unless you treat the addiction along with the disease of obesity, it's going to win out, all right? Because it's got your brain hijacked. The only way to unshackle yourself from the chains of obesity is to be abstinent. So in the case of alcohol or drugs, it means no alcohol or no drugs. In the case of food, it means you figure out what your trigger substances are and then you refrain from engaging in them. So let's talk about what happens to the hostages you take when you are active in your addiction. And when I say hostages, I mainly mean your family. Because when we're active in our addictions, we reel everybody in our orbits into our addictions, and they suffer right along with us. So Yvonne, and I want to thank Yvonne, as always, and Laura Preston for working with me, for helping generate an audience, and for all of you who help bring others to this recovery page and this recovery program. I want to thank all of you because the more people we can help, the better. So we take people hostages, and Yvonne posted something the other day about addiction being a family disease. Addiction is most definitely a family disease in many, many ways. And in a lot of addiction treatment programs, addiction circles, they say that addicts don't take spouses, they take hostages. And the reason we say that is because our lives are very much governed by, ruled by, and our behavior determined by our addiction. Because when we're in active addiction, remember, we have a very narrow view of the world. If you have a food addiction, your primary focus is on food. What you're going to eat, when you're going to eat it, food networks, recipes, food channel, food. You go right to the recipes in any magazine you find, right? But your view is very limited. You are in that orbit. So anybody who's going to be in your world has to crawl into this little space here, right? So if they're in that little space, they are also under the influence of your addiction, because we're going to talk about some ways. But one of the ways that I was thinking immediately was your moods. All right. And this is not just with family members, but primarily your moods around food can really wreak some havoc in your home. For example, let's say that you had what you consider a bad day. You're judging your day as having been bad. You ate bad foods. You were bad. You're beating yourself up with that invisible emotional hammer that's pounding the shame buttons in your head and your heart and saying, ooh, you know, you just really messed up. You're really a failure. You did it again. Okay. So we're really deep into the stinking thinking, judging ourselves harshly, really beating up on ourselves. We've talked about how we're thinking affects how we're feeling. So if we're thinking these really negative things about ourselves, about our day, about how we behaved in our day, we're probably feeling angry, frustrated, annoyed, despondent, maybe discouraged, hopeless, maybe helpless. There's a whole wide range of feelings that spin out of these thoughts, right? So if we have a triangle and we have thoughts on one point, feelings on another point, and behaviors on another point, all three of these things are connected and you really can't separate them. So we're having this negative storm in our head, right? This storm of negative thoughts, and it's like a hurricane. It's like a tornado in your head. I would literally refer to these things when I would experience them as storms in my head. Like I was just so shrouded and enveloped and enclosed by this negativity. It's like Linus's stinky blanket, it flies all around you. But this is about our thoughts. So when we're thinking these things, we're feeling these miserable feelings, how are we behaving? How do you behave when you're thinking crappy things about yourself? When you're thinking a lot of negativity, when you're feeling discouraged and negative and hopeless and helpless? Probably not acting like a ray of sunshine around other people, right? And as we all know, we tend to treat the people in our own homes worse than we treat anybody else, which kind of sucks all by itself, but it's true, right? So we come home, we're mad at ourselves, we're telling ourselves we had a bad day. You walk in the door and your family knows immediately, oh God, run, scatter. So if you walk in your house and your spouse and your kids and your dog and your cat all go in different directions, you're probably wearing a look that says, get out of my way or I'm going to eat you alive, right? And think about the ways you have done that, right? You might walk in the door and you might be slamming cupboards, or you might be, all of a sudden you see a mess in the house and you're yelling at the kids, pick up the mess, and you're yelling at your husband, you've been home all day and you didn't do a thing, and whatever. But all of that negativity starts spewing out of your mouth, and you're directing it at your hostages, because there they are, stuck in that house with your nasty little self who's having a fit because you are hijacked in your brain by this awful, awful disease, right? It's kind of how it plays out, right? Let's talk about specific ways that families are affected through one person's addictive behavior, okay? We said already that addicts take hostages, right? Maybe rather than yelling at everybody you see, you decide to go into your house and you don't want to take it out on everybody. So you march straight down the hall or up the stairs and you go to your room and you shut the door. Well, you're isolating, right? And maybe your kids have been looking forward to seeing you, or maybe your spouse has been looking forward to seeing you. And now you don't want to talk to anybody. You think you're doing them a favor, and maybe it's the lesser of two evils by locking yourself in your room and isolating, but still, you are not sharing the parts of you that they love about you. Your family doesn't love you because of your size or your weight or whatever. They love you because of the person you are when you're at your best and you're sharing love with them, and they see your generous spirit, and they see your compassionate soul, and they see your open arms, and they feel those hugs. That's who they love. But when you're hijacked by your addiction and your worldview gets more narrow and more narrow and more narrow because you're upset, you isolate and you are not available to them. So maybe you isolate in a room by yourself and they're left being sad or lonely or missing you or fearful about what's going on with you. And believe me, when your family members see you upset, they worry. They worry about you. They might be afraid of you. Is that what you want? I know it's not what you want, but that's exactly what happens sometimes when we get active in our addictions. We're kind of scary sometimes. Believe me, I've had plenty of people tell me, you're scary. I don't like that. That's not how I want to be known, especially by the people I care about and love, right? Or there's another way to isolate. Maybe you say to yourself, okay, I have to be present. So you're physically present with your family, but you're so absent emotionally and mentally because you are somewhere thinking about how bad you were and how bad your day was, or you're obsessing about what you can eat to get away from these horrible feelings. So you can isolate, whether you're by yourself or whether you're with other people, right? It's kind of like zoning out or spacing out, or, you're just not present. Remember, Recovery is mindful. It's being present. It's being focused. It's saying, I'm not living in this small captive world. I'm going to expand. And the only way to do that is to live your program of recovery. Because addiction is a very selfish disease. Now, people kind of get upset when I talk about that, but I'm not saying you're a selfish person. I had this wonderful professor when I was in my master's program, and he used to say, do not hear what I am not saying. So when I talk about addiction being a selfish disease, I'm not calling you selfish. I'm not saying the essence of who you are is a selfish person. But when you are captive, when you have the chains of addiction holding you firmly, you're very self-centered. You're very self-focused because you're thinking about what you did wrong, what you did right, what you want to eat, where you can get it, what did you eat last, So your focus is on self. One of the mottos, they say, of an addict is, I want what I want when I want it. So maybe I'm thinking about food and I decide I have to have this now. And the craving is so strong and the addiction has such a hold over me that I might just get up and walk out and take the car and leave. And my family's going, what, where, why? So I'm isolated. I'm thinking inside my head a lot of the time about the addiction, thoughts about me and food, thoughts about how awful I am in relation to food. It's just so obsessive, right? People have described it that way. It's such a full-time job being obsessed with food. And we are therefore not present for our families. And they didn't do anything to deserve that. They're baffled. So what do kids do? All kinds of different things. Some kids try to fix it. They see that you're unhappy and they know that food makes you happy, right? They've witnessed this. They see your mood change when you get something you want. So maybe they become little enablers. And maybe your spouse does too, because the last thing your spouse wants is another miserable night because you're ticked off, in a bad mood, taking it out on everybody, or you're sullen, you're isolated, you're not interacting. So they bring you what they know will make you happy, that will put you in a good mood, at least for the moment, right? Because eventually you're going to go back into that miserable spiral about why did you and how could they and if they cared, and you do that craziness in your head. But for the moment, so maybe you have a little child who tries to make it better by bringing you some food. Or maybe you have a child who tries to distract your attention by being perfect and saying, look what I did today. Look what I made you. What can I do for you? Can I rub your back? Can I comb your hair? Can I, what can I do for you? They're just trying to make it better by being that perfect little child. You might have a child who says, okay, I got to get the attention off of this. And the only way I know how to do it is to be bad. So you have a kid who's constantly in trouble. They act out. They're the problem child in the family. But really, what they're doing is trying to get attention away from this issue you have, even though it's not even spoken about, right? Or you may have a child who becomes the family clown, right? They're always trying to make people laugh because what they're trying to do is lighten up the tension in the home. So maybe you grew up in a home that was filled with addiction, whether it was food or alcohol or drugs or gambling or shopping or sex or whatever it was. You've seen these roles in yourself, in your siblings, in the other parent, right? So your addiction affects everybody. What about the struggles that the children endure because you're teaching them to be the same way you were? whether it's with the behavior. They say between genetics and environment that if you have one parent who's an addict, you've got like 50% chance of being an addict of something. If both are, you're pretty much screwed, right? Now, that's not everybody everywhere. But if you live in a home where you see the ramifications of addiction, whether it's the physical part of the addiction, whether somebody's drinking or smoking marijuana, or, somebody's got this food addiction and the whole household is centered on food, or even if there's an addiction present and you're not even aware of it. Maybe one of your parents is a closet drinker, or maybe they have a pornography addiction, but there's not pornography laying around. There's still an emotional, addictive system, right? There are secrets, there's a vibe, there's isolation, there's distraction, right? And so kids, whether or not they pick up the addictive behavior or they've got that addictive genetic propensity, what are you teaching them in terms of how to behave, right? If you're an addict, your moods are a lot of times all over the place, right? One minute you're joyful and blissful because you're either high or you're sugar high, or you're drunk, or you're, and the next minute you're like all ticked off and the world is miserable. And so you got these kids who don't know what to expect. So then their behavior becomes a little sporadic and a little unpredictable. Your relationship with your mate, again, sometimes it's just nasty and snarly and awful all the time. Sometimes it's just shut down. That's what you're teaching your kids. That's what you're teaching the next generation. If your addiction is food and you have all kinds of junk food around the house and you're feeding your family, fast food 2 or 3 times a day, 6 or 7 days a week, or if they're allowed to go to the pantry and have whatever kind of junk they want whenever they want it, because that's what you do, what are you teaching them, right? Really unhealthy habits. So, our families are really taken hostage by our addictions, right? So we don't want that, right? Also, there's a lot of negative attitudes when there's an addiction present in the house. So kids sometimes learn to be very negative. The home is not the kind of place that I know we all want it to be for those kids. We want a happy home. We want a pleasant home. We want a peaceful home. But we're not happy or peaceful or relaxed internally when we're active in addiction. So it's kind of difficult for the household in general to have that easygoing, peaceful, safe atmosphere that we want to present for our kids. The parents, if the parent is the addict, there's a lot of inconsistency, right? If you're in a foul mood, you're ignoring the kids, you're telling them to take the keys and get out of there. You don't care where they go. You don't, But if you're clear-headed, if you're not, you start asking all these questions about where you're going, who you're with. The kids are like, why do you care? Last week you didn't care where I went or who I was with. Or maybe sometimes you follow through with the rules that you have for your family. And if you're in a miserable mood, or if you're high, or if you're drunk, or if you're whatever, you get all lax. So there's all this inconsistency. But we don't think about how we're affecting others with our addictions. But I promise you we do. And even though it might not be in our families, it could be in public, right? You go out and you're miserably full and you feel like crap, or you whatever, right? And you go to the doctor's office maybe, and you're miserable and they make you wait and wait and wait. Well, you just want to go home and sleep, because a lot of times, overeating makes you tired. Or if you're really heavy, you get tired a lot. And so you get short-tempered with the office staff, or, maybe you're just grumpy in general. So our addictions are omnipresent. They affect all of our world. And we do take people hostage. We do take prisoners. There was another saying I was trying to think of, and I can't think of it right now. But I wanted to talk a little bit also about what they say in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Overeaters Anonymous about how people sometimes are not aware of their behavior in relation to other people. So I'm going to look at some of those things and talk about some of the self-destructive things that we do that affect other people. Okay, one of the things that addicts are very well known for is controlling other people, right? And we have this misconception about what it means to control other people. But if you think about control as saying or doing things to get people to do what you want. So maybe you want Honey to run out and get you some ice cream. So you characteristically or uncharacteristically, I don't know, you are all sweet and loving and, snuggle up to your spouse or your mate or, and you're all sweet and loving, but you're doing it because you have an ulterior motive. You want them to go to the store for you, right? Or your teenager comes in and you're like, hey, would you like to take the car out tonight? Well, if you run to the store and bring me this and then you can just go do what you want. You have an underlying motive, right? So do you control others when you're in your addiction to get what it is you want? Maybe you want everybody out of the house, right? Maybe you tell the kids, you know what? Here's 5 movies. Go into the den. I'm going into my room so you can be alone with your food, right? We do those kinds of things. It's isolating them. It's isolating us. But we want what we want when we want it. And right now, maybe what I want is to be alone with my food. The heck with everybody else. Never mind what they want, right? You done that? Have you done that? Yeah, most of us have done that. We try to control others. We manipulate people. Do we intimidate people? Oh, buddy, come on. Admit some of this, right? Maybe you know that if you're angry and pissy and snarly, you can get your spouse to cave. Even though maybe you made an assigned agreement, no matter what I do, don't give in, do not take me to Dairy Queen or Krispy Kreme or whatever it is. And your spouse gives in because you're being such a snot, right? You may pout, you may slam things, they may just, like a child, just do it already, right? Because they can't take it. So maybe we use our behaviors in other ways, like that. Or if we've asked our family or our friends or whatever to help us in saying, maybe you have a code word that means, are you sure you really want to eat that? But when they do, we give them the death glare, right? Or, we get really mean or ugly or give them the silent treatment, even though we've made that agreement. Do you engage in gossiping about other people and their weight? These are addictive behaviors because we're all focused on what we want when we want it, right? We don't want them to look better than us. We don't want them to lose more weight than us. We don't want them talking about us. So, maybe we can prevent that by talking about somebody else. Or, what do we do in our treatment of other people when we're not feeling so good about ourselves? Remember, shame is the innermost core of addiction. And so when our shame is ignited and inflamed, we do ugly things. We talk bad about other people, to make ourselves feel better, or we compare ourselves, or we gossip, or we leave somebody out, or we're just ugly. We just behave badly. We behave in ways that we don't like, right? What about shaming other people, right? We talk about those alcoholics and why they don't just push away from the bar, or we talk about How could anybody bring pornography into their house? That is disgusting, right? We point the fingers out there because we don't want to look at what's going on in here, right? So freedom from all of that, freedom from the chains of obesity, freedom from the mind trap that is active addiction is recovery. The only way to have the clear brain is to be abstinent. And that's why they say abstinence is only the first step. And that's why, at least with the 12 steps, there are 12 steps. And a lot of those 12 steps involve dealing with other people because we harm people along the way when we're active in our addictions. And so part of living in recovery, remember, recovery is not just abstinence. Abstinence is abstinence, meaning we're not under the influence. Recovery is a mindset. Recovery is a way of life. Recovery is living according to our values. Recovery is making wise decisions that lead us closer to our meaningful matters. The things we say are meaningful to us and the things that matter to us. So our recoveries are to get us in line with our values. So when we behave icky, when we treat someone badly, when we're having a bad day, when we're beating ourselves up about something we did in regard to our addiction, our food, or our whatever, we apologize for it so that we can live clear, right? We don't build up all this stuff that piles into us and we feel guilty about, and we feel remorseful about, and we feel shameful about. No, we keep the emotional slate clean. We say, I hurt you in this way, or my behavior affected you in this way, and I'm sorry. So recovery is about a whole lot more than just the abstinence. And we're going to move on in our program in the next couple of weeks, assuming abstinence, okay? We're going to assume abstinence. And if you're not at abstinence, then really put some effort into that, all right? You're not going to get abstinent without effort. We've talked about what the requirements for abstinence are. If you're having trouble doing it, you need to get help. You need to get a sponsor. You need to be active every day in reaching out to other people. You need to immerse yourself in a recovery way of life. But we're going to talk about the other aspects of recovery that assume abstinence, because until you have abstinence, you're not going to move on in this deeper work, these deeper levels of recovery. So we're going to assume abstinence for a little while, and we're going to talk about some of the other aspects of recovery, because you are a whole human being, all right? You don't want to live like this. We want to live like this. So let's talk about, in the next couple of weeks and months, what living like this is like when we're not trapped by our addiction, when we put it aside and we learn to live life more fully. So that's where we're headed with our program. And we want, I know that for at least 99% of us, some of our meaningful matters are having meaningful relationships, having intimate relationships, having relationships with people where they can trust us, that we're going to be the same person all the time. We're not going to be all mood swingy because, we had too much sugar, or we're angry at ourselves because we engaged in something we didn't want to. So we're going to learn to have an inner peace. Recovery is about having an inner peace. Not all the time. We're human, right? It's not about perfection. It's about inching forward to liking ourselves better. Because when we like ourselves better, when we dig through the shame, then we are free to have a healthier relationship with food, a healthier relationship with other people. And we're free to teach our families to have the kind of home that we want them to have. So that's where we're at today, right? It's a journey. Every little piece of progress is a magnificent victory, right? Every time you do something that you are proud of and you feel good about, you make a big deal about that, even if it's just inside your head, right? If you have a few people in your life that you can go to and say, listen, I did this today and I'm really proud of myself and I want to share it with somebody, then do that, right? Because we have to celebrate the little victories, because the little victories lead up to more of a life that's fuller than living here, right? We're not going to live perfectly any day. We're not going to live perfectly any day. But you know what? If we can live with a positive attitude and thinking positive thoughts about ourselves more of the time than we're doing negative, we're doing well, right? So it's about one choice at a time, one decision at a time, one eating decision at a time, one communication decision at a time, one behavioral moment at a time, right? Moving in a direction that moves us closer to who we say we want to be. So much, so much, so much. I love this work. I love this play. I love doing what I'm doing. And I love that you care enough about you to take the time to spend with me and with one another. So take some more of that time, post in the Facebook group, food addiction, fair and firm, like I can't remember that one. And we will see you today, tomorrow, as often as we possibly can. All right, you guys, share your greatness with one another. We all need a little bit of it all the time. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here. Bye.